the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you are answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
The Stevens Institute of Technology is proud to present the Hugo New Corporation Sustainability Seminar Series, brought to you by Brown & Codwell, Geocetic Consultants, H2M Architect and Engineers, BEM Systems, and Catalyst Group.
I am so happy to be here. And when I was with you 4 years ago or at Stevens speaking to a class of graduate students as well, we were more talking broadly and generally about the reality of the climate crisis as opposed to more specifically on how to talk about the climate crisis. And I have, as Dibs shared with you, have been working full-time on the reality of the climate crisis for many years now, beginning when I worked with the International Monetary Fund office at the United Nations. I joined that office as a representative of the IMF in the very early 1990s, so probably before many of you maybe were even born, but it was a time where the world recognized the climate reality and that there was a crisis, but we hadn't defined it. It's still, in fact, I joined the IMF office working on the preparatory committee for the first, for the Earth Summit that was held in 1992 in Brazil. And many of you may now be familiar with the Paris Agreement, which we'll talk a little bit about as well, but that it happened after that meeting in 1992 when we established all of these international bodies to talk about the climate crisis. We were just defining sustainability. We recognized the urgency of the problem, but again, it seemed so many generations away and so far off where had we addressed the crisis with the urgency required then, we would be in a different place than we are now. But we didn't, and we can't go back there, so we move forward. As you heard, I have worked since then with the Climate Reality Project, training with Al Gore and the program when it was first established in 2007. And I don't know, like many of you perhaps, or, we pursue our passions or we come from where we're at. And for me at that time, having worked on this big international stage, I had 2 small young children and my life was quite different. How was I going to jump in and make the most impact? And I'm sure you're thinking about that as soon to be graduates or, some of you that are coming in from outside. As we talk about this in this and at this moment in time where life is very divisive, amongst our friends and our families, we're being asked to choose sides on issues and global ideas and global experiences that we shouldn't have to choose sides on. We should all be coming together on. And so I established Climate Mama, as you heard about, the organization back then. We were the first at the time. I was looking for a way to be able to talk to other parents I was meeting about the climate crisis to learn more, but in my voice, not as an economist or as a policy analyst, but as a parent. How did I talk to my kids? How do I talk to my neighbors or friends of my children's, their parents, my contemporaries? And I didn't find that in that voice, so we created Climate Mama. It's gone through many stages and many, different permutations. But in 2019, which is when I was finalizing this book that I'd been working on for in my head for many years, but it was the 10th anniversary of Climate Mama, and it also seemed like an opportune time to address this because as you may know or feel, over the last few years, we've been hearing more and more from young people publicly raising their voices, demanding action on the climate crisis, pre-COVID, in the streets, still in the streets in many ways, online, and not that they were not there before over the many years I've been involved on the climate movement, but we were hearing them in a way that we were not hearing them before. And that was different. And I was hearing from many parents and individuals too, like, oh my gosh, how do I respond? So it felt like the right time to put this into a book and create it. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but I want to start here. This photograph might look familiar to many of you. It actually has a name. It's called Earthrise. It was taken by the Apollo 8 mission, which on Christmas Eve in 1968. And it was taken, as you can see, the lunar surface as the Apollo mission left the near Earth orbit of our planet. And we saw ourselves, that the astronauts saw our planet for the first time. It was the first time that humans from space saw ourselves, looked upon us. And that photograph, different from now, where we're so scattered with media, with different news channels, different ways to tune in to each other. Then there were, 2 or 3 or 4 major media new television stations in the US, and they broadcast out to television stations in other places around the world. And the world came together and saw this picture at the same time. And we, in the United States and in other places around the world, I think felt differently about our planet, seeing it as this pale blue dot in space. And in the United States, we established the first Earth Day, the first Clean Air and Clean Water Act were established within 2 years of this photograph. The Environmental Protection Agency was established by a Republican president in the United States. So this divide of choose or not choose, or the environment or the economy, it was about looking after our planet in a better way. And this photograph had a lot to do with it. And I put it there because as we are living COVID, as we are living a global pandemic that, in some ways, these zoonotic diseases, just as we are being more inundated with vector-borne diseases because of our climate crisis, as we infringe on our natural world and come into connection in different ways, it was predicted. We're going to have these global pandemics, but we saw the world come together in a way, a shattering way, a terrible way, but also a way that we started listening to our planet in a different way than we had before. People were sharing, visions of nature and that around the globe. And so that was something that was very special, but also I think that gives us hope because COVID will go away. Will there be another pandemic? Probably, but we will get through this in a very messy way, but we'll get through it. The climate crisis is something that we will live for the rest of our lives. And we need to find a way to get uncomfortable or comfortable with that in a very uncomfortable way. And so this is an excerpt that I wrote in my new book, and I just put in brackets, I took out climate change, the climate crisis, and you could substitute in COVID-19, or the systemic racism and the social injustice that people are boiling over and expressing and demanding action and change on. And all of these things are incredibly sad. They fill us with anger, they fill us with grief, and our children are seeing that. They're seeing us experiencing that, and they're experiencing that. And so how do we move through that, not letting go of that anger or of that sadness or disappointment or grief, but being able to move on so that we can take action? Well, our Climate Mama motto at Climate Mama, and when I talk about in the book, is very simple. I think it's something that perhaps you learned from your parents, you talked about, yourself growing up, perhaps, but there are, these three premises about that. I think if we stick to those, they can help us move through all of these difficult issues that aren't going away, that will be with us that in some fashion or another. So we need to begin by telling the truth. And whether that's telling the truth to a 3-year-old or to a 97-year-old grandparent, we need to share the truth and the reality when it comes to the climate crisis. Again, whether you choose to act on it, whether our policymakers choose to move policy on it, but according to science, it's real, it's happening, it's really bad. We are making it worse, but there is still time. There are things that we can do about it. So whether your passion is as an engineer working on water issues, working on air pollution, working on new technologies, the truth and the reality is that you will be faced with issues related to the climate crisis throughout your work and throughout your lifetime. And we as parents, again, whether we have young children, middle school, college, or children with children of their own, the truth is where we're at, is that the climate crisis is happening. Science is telling us that, and we can choose to act on it or not. But putting our heads in the sand isn't going to make it go away, nor is it going to make it less worse than it is. But by taking actions, right? So we can't just talk the talk. We actually need to move forward and take action. And by moving through that fear, because there's lots to be fearful about, we can hopefully, instead of living a life of chaos with the climate crisis, as we're experiencing now, with stronger storms, with terrible wildfires, with disease, with many of the impacts of the climate crisis. And again, are they just caused by the climate crisis? No, but climate change is a threat multiplier. It makes everything worse. It makes global pandemics worse, because where do you go when you have to social distance and you experience an extreme weather event? How do you look after yourself? The connections and that intersectionality of the climate crisis with everything that we do is an important truth to tell and something to be able to see. So we need to trust in the science. We need to be age appropriate and honest, again, whether it's your 3-year-old or your 33-year-old. And, there always is this, and I just did a talk actually earlier today to LIM College students, which are students in the fashion hoping to be in the fashion industry. And I get asked this question often, but I did today as well. So I'm reminiscent of it, on the top of my brain, if I can share that, is what does it matter what I do? Because we need systemic change. And yes, we need systemic change, but we need those that can go big. So that's whether that's the mayor of your town, the prime minister or president of a country, the head of a corporation. those people that can take big steps have to do so running and recognize not only talking about the reality of the climate crisis, but that there's a plan for it. And the rest of us, we take one step at a time and we do what we can. We raise attention, we change things in our lives in a similar way as we saw with COVID-19. And again, I think we can look to comparisons there. As the pandemic hit, right, and what individual healthcare workers did in their individual hospitals, trying to sustain and help people not die from what was happening. Us as individuals, by making meals, by taking masks that we made in communities, all of that helped us move forward, helped humanity on a very local level move forward. And we can do similar things from a human perspective with the climate crisis and from a practical perspective in terms of individual things that we can do. I just saw a report that came out last week. It needs to be peer reviewed, but a study that says actually, saying that we need to make individual choices and changes. And this was being discussed in a climate communications group, an international group I'm part of, actually turns people off, that they don't want to do anything. If they're not involved in the movement, when they hear they have to cut their meat consumption or have to do these things, it just makes people want to bury their head farther. Well, so I think it's finding that agency for each individual, finding the ability to remind our children and ourselves that the climate crisis is all encompassing, but how we pursue it, our passions from a lens of looking through it as part of addressing the climate crisis, whether you're an artist, you're an engineer, you're a scientist, you're a teacher. There are ways to tell the truth about the climate crisis. There are ways to take action about the climate crisis, and there are ways to address the climate crisis. And one important thing, as I mentioned, the climate crisis is a threat multiplier, but similar to what we are finding out through data and peer-reviewed studies with the COVID crisis, we see this with the climate crisis. While it's happening to everyone, it is not happening to everyone equally. And so as you work, in the areas you will be helping and working on, and the companies you'll be with, recognize that the climate crisis, and we can hide it more easily in a country like the US, but there, we're coming up on the 15th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, the 3rd anniversary of Hurricane Maria. There are people that in Louisiana that have not recovered. They're not back in their homes 15 years later. They're under stress. They're dealing with mental anguish from that extreme weather event. Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy in our region, many people are not back in their homes. They haven't rebuilt. And this is something we can hide in some ways because it's off of the pages of the media, the newspapers, but many communities continue to suffer, and it's only going to get worse. And so we can't move forward if we are leaving people behind. So I bring that up, and I think that's an important thing for us to all remember. On, telling the truth, actions speak louder than words. I talked about that grief, that sadness, that overwhelming feeling of I can't do anything. You need to take care of yourself so you can take care of your community. And in the book, my book, How to Talk to Your Kids About Climate Change, Turning Angst into Action, I make this very clear, and there are multiple chapters about it too. We need to educate ourselves, right? So before you can understand the actions that are required, you need to understand the science. You need to understand the politics, because, well, climate change, the climate crisis, must not be political. It has become a partisan issue. That is not okay, because it impacts all of us. And we can, if we are being devastated, if we are seeing and experiencing stronger storms, if our roads are flooding on a regular basis, which in many shore communities in New Jersey, I'm sure at Stevens and Hoboken, your community is strongly dealing with, how do you build resiliency to sea level rise? Because that's happening, whether you want to accept that or not. Greenland ice sheets are melting, the Antarctic is melting, the ocean is expanding because it's getting warmer. The science that is causing all of those things to happen isn't stopping because we choose to ignore it, or because, as they did in a town in North Carolina, decide that they were going to use the 100-year flood maps and not the most current ones. Well, things have changed. Flooding has increased. The maps that we need to use to build on the shore, to build in communities, need to address what's happening now on the ground, and the climate crisis is speeding up. So we need to tell the truth. We need to have our actions show that, and that's understanding the science and understanding what's happening. I'm not, you're studying, many of you who are students here are studying to be, in the engineering world, and that's not my forte. I'm an economist and I'm a communicator, and I can share these, but you need to do your own research and you need to find that out. And to be effective in the companies that you're working for, that just has to be part of, become, again, that comfortable part of what we do. Because if you're going to build a building, a house, a bridge, a road, we can't just use the lowest cost bid on things. We need to be able to choose that which will withstand the unfolding climate crisis that we face. So not only are we working to mitigate the impacts of the climate crisis, changing the energy that we're using, maybe doing things on a personal basis that way, but we actually need to figure out how we're going to adapt in our communities. We need engineers to help us understand that. And we also need to be able to understand how we're going to slow down what's happening, because it's coming. So that is a really critical part, coming to terms with it, understanding the science, understanding how politics gets in the way, understanding that the economy and the environment are the same coin. They're just different sides. So we can't choose the economy over addressing the environmental crisis that's unfolding, because if we choose that, we will be dealing with constant trying to rebuild from this extreme weather event or that one. In New Jersey, which is where Stevens is, many of the communities are older. They have, as you well know, I am sure, water systems that have, are built hundreds of years ago. We have overhead power lines, and it's so expensive to replace those things. But if we do not replace our overhead wires, no matter how expensive that is, every time they go down, how much is it to send out a crew to a town for 10 days to put the wires back up? At what point, and I was speaking with this earlier to these students I was talking to this morning, where, for those companies that can look 5 years, 10 years down the road, where's your supply chain? Where, how are you being able to sustain yourself as a company if you're dealing with all of these climate disasters? How is that impacting? So that and companies are not, stupid, and we're going to have that, and we need to do it as municipalities, we need to do it as states, we need to prepare ourselves as a country for what is already here. And then this last premise of those three things, don't be afraid. Well, personally anyways, I have to say that's easier said than done. And there are many, many, many times where I want to just put my head in the sand as well, or pretend what isn't happening isn't happening. But this is our reality. We are living the climate crisis, and we need to know, and you need to know, especially those of you that are young leaders. Maybe this is your first election to vote in. Your voice matters. Your vote matters. Your involvement in our democratic process matters. And that matters to how we address the climate crisis. And again, in my book, as I talk to parents to show their children, you know, not everybody can run for office. It costs a lot of money to run for office, whether, you know, oftentimes at the state or local level. Our system has a lot of cracks in it, but we need to support it in whichever way we can. And showing your children, you know, in times that are not COVID, that you go to the polls with them, showing them how your voting plan is, that, you know, how you're going to do that, talking about it. Those are all important things to show what a democracy is made of and how we have a voice in that. And again, it's not all on your shoulders. This is a problem that has sped up, and my children are in college. My daughter's a senior and my son is just starting graduate school. They're 21 and 22. And they've been on this path with me for many years. And sometimes when they were younger, very willingly, they would come with me to protests and to marches and help me write letters and cards to our elected officials. And then as they got older, they just didn't come, or they thought their mom, oh my gosh, be quiet, Mom, don't talk to Uncle Jay at Thanksgiving because you know what will happen, you both disagree. And for a long time, you know, sometimes I would listen and I didn't talk to Uncle Jay. But I have to say, given where we're at and the divisiveness that we're experiencing in our own families and in our own country over political ideals and issues, when it comes to the climate crisis, which, as I said, is a threat multiplier and all-encompassing, it cannot be political. And while I might disagree with Uncle Jay, showing my children out of a place of love that I can talk to him and I can share my worries and my concerns for their future. I want my children, as I'm sure all of your parents, or if you're a parent, you want yours, to find someone who will love them as much as I do, as you do, that you can fulfill your careers, that you can travel and see the world, and that it is not on the track that we are currently on. If we continue business as usual, and I'm sure that many of you feel that, it will be different. It will be different anyways, because we're farther down that road than it was for your parents or for my children than it has been for me. But we need to be part of what the future holds. We need to follow up and be prepared and demand that those that get our vote, that we support, whether it's a company or an organization, that they don't just talk the talk, that what they promise they see through. We need to plant seeds, literally and figuratively. So talking to your Uncle Jay or Uncle Bob or Aunt Delia, whoever that person is in your family, you know, is part of planting those seeds. And maybe it's not for them because, again, you know, they're far set in their ways, but for your children because they're watching you, or your grandchildren, or your cousin, or your brother, or your sister. And we cannot be afraid to speak the truth and talk about this crisis that we face. I put this at the beginning in my book, and again, I mentioned it at the beginning of my talk, and I really, really feel that youth voices, again, you need to be at the table. You are being brought to the table. You are being heard, and what you have to say is critically important. And how the urgency with which my generation has addressed the crisis that we face, we haven't done it well. And so we need your voices, and we need to stand with you wherever that is needed. And that maybe that's in front sometimes, beside you, behind you, wherever that may be. This is a lifelong problem and an incredible opportunity. So I think that, as talking to whoever you're talking to, and certainly in terms of talking to children, that if we truly face the reality of where we're at, the opportunities to address it are endless, because we need everyone. We need plumbers, we need teachers, we need structural engineers, we need electrical engineers, we need scientists, we need artists, we need everyone. Whatever your passion is, whatever you're passionate about, whatever our children hope to pursue, that is a way forward. We need farmers. We need young farmers. New Jersey is the garden state because it really is. But our farmers are getting older in this state and in many states around the country. We need young people to dig in the dirt, to help run those farms. But again, it doesn't rest all on your shoulders. This is an intergenerational issue that will continue, for generations, because and I imagine you've learned this too, but as scientists, many of you are scientists or as engineers, but we have put in motion something that can't be stopped, right? The scientists tell us this. So if we stop burning fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas tomorrow, or stopped our industrial agriculture, or putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere as we're currently doing, which is over 152 million tons every 24 hours. And, when I talk to young people about the climate crisis, what does that mean, 152 million tons? How do you visualize that? And that's roughly equivalent to about 60 million elephants every day disappearing above our heads. So, get that image in your head for a second, because there aren't that many elephants on the planet. And what would that look like above your head? So our atmosphere is very thin, and we're filling it up with all of these human-created greenhouse gases. We are causing our planet to overheat. Our planet's working overtime to counteract what we're doing, and she's not able to continue to do it. So your voices raising that alarm, worried about your future and your now, are being heard, and they are valid, and we need to listen to them. And we all need to be part of that. So you need to speak up at every opportunity, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, talk to your community. We need to be out there in every way we can, because we have to. This is my family and people in the streets in 2014. Maybe some of you were there with me in New York at this first global climate march. We've had many, and we continue to have them. We just had a march on climate, jobs, and justice in New York, not this past weekend, but the weekend before. And does marching solve everything? By all means, no. And but does it feel important to be in the streets? This March, there were 400,000 of us that took up the avenues of New York City. And the next year, we had the Paris Agreement, which was the agreement where, under the Conference of the Parties, where which is a UN organization that meets annually, but having been worked on this agreement for many years, that countries came together with their own country plan. Nothing was put on a country. Every country came with their own plan, and in Paris agreed that we were facing a climate emergency, and each country needed to do very specific things that was their own agreed items that they would do to try to keep greenhouse gas emissions low enough that we would not see a 1.5 degree rise in temperature. We're already past that, blowing past that. And if we don't keep it at 2 degrees, which was the 1.5 was the aspirational goal, 2 degrees was what the world agreed upon, we would see planetary boundaries being pushed out and dramatic changes happening on our planet. And we are seeing that already. Now, the world came together, more than 170 countries signed off on this, including the United States. We are the only country that says we're going to pull out of this agreement. We will be out of the agreement on November 4th. That's the way it falls out. But if the administration changed its mind or we had a new administration, we could be back in within 30 days. Now, the UN has no power in that regard, except for moral suasion. But when the world comes together, when 400,000 people come to the streets and say we need to see action, things change, and things can change. This is Alana and Elliot, who I mentioned to you before. And, 12 years goes by in a heartbeat. I trained with the Climate Reality Project in 2007 and started my organization 2 years later. My children were in grade school. This is a photo from just over a year ago. And as I said, my kids are now a college senior and a graduate student. And in 2018, we heard from the International Panel on Climate Change, which is a body that reports to that conference of the parties, the people that made the agreement in Paris, the UN body where all of these countries came together. And they issued a report to policymakers that said we had 12 years, not till the world came to an end, not till things were completely out of hand, but 12 years before we pass some of those tipping points. 12 years before likely we will be ice-free in the Arctic. 12 years before we create changes that produce feedback loops where we can't come back from. And we are on that path now. And again, if you're the same age as my children, you might feel like 12 years takes forever. But let me tell you, as a parent who has seen that time go by, it goes by in an instant. And so we have no time left. We need to be taking, as we have with COVID-19, drastic measures. And we're seeing the world is capable of that. So again, lessons that we can learn as a society from dramatic changes that we didn't think that humanity would do. The lockdowns that we endured, the rules that we allowed to be put in place. We need to address the climate crisis as the emergency that it is. And it opens up incredible opportunities because of it, because we need to do so many things, but we can. But know that 12 years flies by in a moment. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see one another, hopefully. And I encourage all of you, to think deeply about this and try hard as you talk to, that uncle at the Thanksgiving table. Well, this year maybe you'll be on a Zoom table with them, or your roommates or your family, from this place of your heart of the reality of what we're facing, and then be resolute that there are many, many people working on solutions, and there are many, many opportunities to slow down this rapid, this train that we're all on together. And again, it impacts some of us worse than others. We need to recognize that as well. That's a critical thing to realize. The climate crisis is global. What we do here in the US, even if we're able to withstand some of these changes, maybe for longer than other places, they're unfolding across the globe to those least responsible for creating those the crisis to happen. So that's part of the story that we tell our children. And whether it's our children again, or your roommate, or your grandmother, or your work colleague, think of your personal climate story, because we're at this point where partisan politics is dividing us, and we mustn't let it do that. And so what is effective is who's that trusted messenger. That's each one of you. You are a trusted messenger in your circle, and with your family, with your colleagues, with your classmates. They trust you because you've earned that trust, in many different ways, or because of love of you as part of their family. So we should be able to find a way to talk about this in a way that helps us share how we might move forward. And part of that will be telling your own personal story. What are your thoughts about the climate crisis? Have you thought about it? How has your personal environment changed? How has the world around you, in the town you live in your family? For me, I spend a lot of time in Western Canada, where I am from. I used to in the summer at a small summer cottage, and I've watched the lake that I'd hoped my children would grow up taking their children warm up and change because of what we've done as humans, but because of our how the climate has changed in Western Canada, and it worries me. And I want my children to be able to go there and to experience that. And that is part of my personal story when I talk about the climate crisis as well. So find, your voice that way, share your stories, and then, again, thank all of you. I'm thanking you and thank your professors for creating this special master's program, because we need people that understand the importance of sustainable planning, of sustainability in materials, of how world sustainability impacts us on a local level and a state level and a national level, and how it impacts our physical world, and how we need to be all part of that solution. So I thank Stevens, I thank the sponsors of this seminar series for bringing people from different aspects of the sustainability story. I thank you for listening to me and for letting me share a little bit about my new book as well. I think, as was shared in the title, it's not just about talking to your kids, because we have to be able to talk to everyone about the reality of what we're facing. So I look forward to answering questions, to being here with you for longer. So I'm not going away, but I've certainly talked for a long time. So I'm going to stop speaking now and turn the floor back to all of you.